guys, welcome to the lesson. And in today's lesson, I'll be talking about the cell membrane. So I'll teach everything that you need to know about the cell membrane at your level. I know that if you further your studies, maybe if you're going to study medicine, surgery, or pure biology, you're going to cover this more in depth. But I'll try to go a little bit deeper compared to how you went when you learned it back in high school. I know that in high school you learned that the cell membrane, it allows the entry and exit of substances. You just end it from there, okay? But here I'm just going to go a little bit deeper, okay? Let me just say at the university they dive a little bit deeper into the cell membrane. So I'll be covering the following. I'll cover the structure of the cell membrane, which is very important. And then apart from that, I'll talk about how the cell membrane allows the entry and the exit of substances. Now, what I've just written here, this whole statement here, it can also be, or let me just say, sometimes the lecturers might phrase it in this way. Instead of saying how the cell membrane allows the entry and the exit of substances, they might say that how the cell membrane receptors transmit messages across the cell membrane. Don't worry, I'll explain what this means, what these terminologies mean. Okay. Then now, apart from that, I also talk about these concepts here. I talk about simple diffusion, the facilitated diffusion, the ligands, the carrier proteins, the channel protein, the passive transport, active transport, and the receptors. Okay. So these concepts are very important and they might ask you any question about them. So I'm going to explain everything. Don't worry if the video is going to be quite longer because just have a lot of things to share. Okay, so make sure that you take your time and watch the video. Okay, so now let us proceed. Let's begin by talking about the structure of the cell membrane. Okay, so essentially you need to know that a cell membrane has got a layer, or let me just say it is a layer. When you look at how the cell is, let me just draw for you maybe just a random cell. For instance, when you look at how the cell membrane looks like on diagrams, you figure out that, for instance, this is an animal cell. A cell membrane will look like this. Okay, this will be the cell membrane, and then here inside here there will be the nucleus. Okay, so now the cell membrane, it is a layer. Okay, it is a layer that covers or protects the cytoplasm. Here inside it is the cytoplasm. So it will kind of like protect the cytoplasm or the inside part of the cell, or the intracellular. Sometimes they might say intracellular. Let me write that down properly. Intracellular environment or area. Okay, so it is a layer. Okay, so now for the fact that it is a layer, we are going to break it down now itself alone. Okay, so this is a layer. It is a layer. So now, since it is a layer, what is it made up of? You need to know this. So the cell membrane as a layer, it is made up of what is called phospholipids. Now you might ask, okay, now what do you mean by phospholipids? What is this? So phospholipids is as a result of the combination of the phosphate ion, and the lipid. Okay, it is made up of the lipids. Now, which kind of lipids? Remember, there are different kind of lipids. There are oils, fats. So now, for lipids, the kind of lipids that the cell membrane is made up of is called the fatty acids. Okay, fatty acids. So they might ask you like, what's the name of the lipid that the cell membrane is made up of? You need to know that it is made up of the fatty acids. So basically, the cell membrane as a layer, it is made up of the phospholipid or the phosphate ion and the fatty acids or the lipids. If you want, you can say that. Okay. So now this phosphate ion, it is, remember I've said it is an ion. It is basically an anion, because it is negatively charged, and usually in many books or maybe from your lectures you see that it is written like this, PO4A with a negative. Okay, so it is charged, the phosphate is charged. Meanwhile the fatty acids aren't charged. Okay, in other words, you find that they might say that they might say that they are non-polar. Okay, so if they say that, actually this is another feature of fatty acids. Now there is another topic which I'm going to teach on the macromolecules, where we're going to cover the lipids in depth. Okay, so now, but you need to know that they are non-polar, because a question might come. Don't worry, I'll explain where you need to apply this concept here. But for now, you need to know that the cell membrane is made up of the lipids, or let me just say the phosphate and the fatty acids. The phosphate is negatively charged, it is charged, or in other words, you can also say that it is polar. And then the fatty acid, the fatty acid, because it isn't one, they are non-polar. They are not charged. They don't have a charge. Okay, and for this reason, they have a certain feature which I'm going to explain, because of their ability of being non-polar, or their inability of not being polar. Okay, so now let me not talk much about this. So let's move on. So now, having said that it is made up of the phospholipids, which is the phosphate and the fatty acid. Now, you might be asking yourself, okay, now, how do they look like? How are they oriented? So they are oriented like this. So they look like this. Okay, so they look like this. Structure looking like whereby this is looking like a head, and these two are looking like tails. Okay, so now this head-like structure that you're seeing right now, it is the phosphate. The phosphate. Okay, this is the phosphate. What am I writing? Phosphate. This is the phosphate. So the head-like structure is the phosphate. Maybe sometimes they might bring it to you, like label the structure. I don't know what they might bring, but they teach these things. Some lectures might not even go deeper, but it is part of your syllabus. Okay, so that is looking like, these two structures, let me point them, the two of them. These tail-like structures that you're seeing right now, these tail-like structures are the fatty acids. Okay, so these are the fatty acids. Now remember, I said that the head, it is polar, it is charged, negatively charged, and the tails, the fatty acids, are non-polar, they aren't charged. So because of this reason, or these two reasons, the charged one, which is the phosphate, the head, it is able to interact with water. Okay, this is able to interact with water, and these two do not interact with water. So since they don't, since the phosphate or the head is able to interact with water, it is said to be hydrophilic. Okay, hydrophilic, that is written like this. See, hydrophilic, meaning that it interacts with water. This hydro means water, in case you don't know. Hydro itself, it means water. Okay, so now this phosphate head, because it is charged, it is able to interact with water. But if you go deeper in chemistry, there is a detailed explanation or a reason why that happens, a reason why the charged one is able to interact with water. Okay. Now, as for these two other fatty acids, for them it is the opposite. They do not interact with water, so they are called. They are said to be. They are said to be hydrophobic. They say to be hydrophobic. Hydro means water, right? And then this phobic. If maybe you are struggling to remember these two, so just know that the one that is like phobic, this phobic, it comes from the word phobia. Okay, it comes from the word phobia. So if you have, let's say, a phobia like of something, it's like you have a fear of something. Okay, you don't interact with it because you are afraid of it. Same applies to this case here. The tails, it's like they fear water, so they don't interact with water, anything that has to do with water molecules. Okay. So if you're struggling to remember, just know that okay, the one that has got something that sounds like phobia or phob from the word phobia, which is phobic, it is the one that represents the part that do not interact with water. Okay. So these two you need to know them because maybe they might ask you some questions about them. And then now, so the combination of the phosphate height in these two tails is what is called the combination when they are combined. The single combination is what is called phosphor, phosphor, phospholipids. Okay, so each combination is called a phospholipid. Now, if there are many combination of this, okay, a complex of the phosphate height and the fatty acids is what is called the phospholipid. Okay, because phosphor, as I said, it represents the phosphate, and lipid, it represents the fatty acids. So instead of saying no, this is the phosphate height and the the fatty acids, you can simply say this is a phospholipid. Okay, and when there are many, they are said to be phospholipids. Okay, so now I hope now it should be making sense while you're studying, because when you find where you're saying phospholipid, now you know what they're talking about. Okay, so now since the cell membrane is made up of like a series of these, okay, they are interconnected. Many of the phospholipids are connected together. They are like joined together. Okay, now they are oriented in a certain manner. The orientation is because of the characters of the phosphate height and the fatty acids. Okay, so let's talk about the orientation. I'll talk about how they are oriented because you also need to know how they are oriented and why they are oriented in such a manner. Okay, so now let's talk about it. Okay. So they are oriented like this. There is a one phospholipid here. Okay, another one here. Let me just pause the video. I draw them. Okay, so it's more like a series of these. Okay, so now they are oriented like this. Now this is just a single layer. Okay, a single layer of phospholipid. So this cell membrane now it isn't made up of one layer. Let's say maybe imagine this whole layer. I think let me just draw. Okay, so now imagine this is a layer of phospholipid. It is surrounding the cytoplasm. Okay, it is the cell membrane. It is covering the cell. Now imagine this is inside the cytoplasm. Again, inside the cytoplasm, apart from the external or the extracellular part, actually extracellular means outside the cell, and then intracellular means inside the cell. So now, imagine if it were to look like this, whereby the inside part is the cytoplasm, and then these are the fatty acids which do not interact with water. But again, inside the cytoplasm there exist water molecules. So there exist water molecules, and for that reason, it wouldn't have worked out if it only had a single layer of phospholipids. So to avoid that issue, or to prevent now the fatty acid from interacting with the water that is found inside the cell, the cytoplasm, or the intracellular water molecules, it is now oriented in such a way that every fatty acid, it is again protected by, another phospholipid, which is where the head is shielding these fatty acids from the intracellular outer molecules. Okay, already these phosphate aids, they are shielding these fatty acids from the external outer molecules or the extracellular outer molecules, because there might exist some outer molecules here. And then now from the inside again, there are another series of phospholipids which are connected now, which is now forming another layer. Okay, now another layer of phospholipids is being formed. Let me just now finish drawing. Okay, so now another layer of phospholipids is now formed on the internal part or the intracellular part to protect these fatty acids, the tails, from the water that is found inside the cell, the cell membrane. Okay, so for that, it is said to be a bilayer of phospholipids. Okay, you hear that? No, the cell membrane is a bilayer of phospholipids. Bilayer written like this, bilayer. Okay, bi means two. They mean that two layers of phospholipids. Okay, so it is made up of two layers of phospholipids to protect or to prevent the tails or the fatty acids from interacting with the intracellular. Listen, this layer which is found inside here, it is protecting the fatty acids from interacting with the water that is found inside the cell of the intracellular water molecules, and then this other layer that is found here outside, it is protecting these now fatty acids from interacting with the water molecules that can exist here outside here. Okay, so for that, it is a bilayer of phospholipids. I hope that now it will be making sense when you hear it from your lectures, because lectures don't go this deeper. They might just explain it in service, on the service, and they want you to understand everything. Now, I've just drawn it for purpose of making you understand. Okay, so for the purpose of making you understand, but oftenly you'll be seeing it being drawn like this. Let me just pause the video for a minute. Okay, so something like this. You see that they have been drawn like this. They are still representing the same thing here. It's just that they don't draw the more realistic part. This is what realistically happens. Okay, so this is what happens. It is oriented in this manner so that this layer is defending from the intracellular outer molecules and the other layer from the extracellular molecules. So now, I think this is all you need to know at your level. How they are oriented and why they are oriented like that, and they are able to label these structures. This is all about these structures. Okay. Now let me now explain how now the cell membrane work. And if you haven't joined my Telegram group where I post all the video lessons for biology, chemistry, physics, and mathematics, make sure that you contact me. I add you to the group. Okay, so now let us proceed. Now let's look at how the cell membrane work to fulfill its function. Okay, its general function. So, okay, so now oftenly you'll be seeing the structure of the cell membrane being drawn like this. Now, behind the scenes, or behind the hood, or in the nutshell, the cell membrane has got some other additional structures that are found on the surface, okay, on its surface, or on the phospholipids. Okay, so there are some other structures which are kind of like scattered because they are randomly arranged, but they are found scattered on the surface of the cell membrane, which looks like somehow this what I've just drawn. Okay, now what are these structures? These structures are called the proteins. Okay, they are called the proteins. I mean, they are proteins, but the special thing about these proteins is that they help in transporting substances from the inside, from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell, and from the inside of the cell to the outside part of the cell. Okay. Now, there are different types of protein that are found. There are those that are transport proteins and that are not transport. Right now, in this video, since we are interested in knowing how the membrane fulfill its function, we are going to focus on what are called the transport proteins. So these are some of the transport proteins that are found on the cell membrane, and each transport protein has got a name. So these transport proteins, they aid or they help the cell membrane to fulfill its function. Now, how does that happen? I might be asking yourself right now. So this is how it happens. So there are some processes that happens or that occurs during the transporting of molecules from the outside to the inside and from the inside to the outside part. Okay, so some of the transport proteins that are involved are what I'm going to mention. So this one here, that is appearing to be, this is like a hole, okay, just like the way a pipe looks like, okay, which it looks like a little bit longer with a hole inside it. So this is called the porous. They are called the porous protein or the channel proteins. They are called the porous proteins, or I think let me just add a stroke, or the channel proteins. Sometimes you might hear them saying now the porous protein or the channel proteins. Just know that they are talking about one and the same thing. Okay. Now they are called porous. When something is porous, it has got some pores in it. Pores, they mean like holes. You know. So because of the pores that they have inside them, they are called the porous proteins. And then there are the other categories of proteins. These two here, these are called the carrier proteins. They are called the carrier proteins, or they are called the carrier proteins or the receptors. Let me just say receptor proteins. So they are called the receptor proteins or the carrier proteins. So now, if you ever hear anywhere where they say carrier protein, receptor protein, just know that they are talking about one and the same thing. Okay. So it's very important that you are familiar with this, because while explaining, you'll be mentioning them. Okay, in your explanations, you'll be required to mention them in order for you to just earn some marks, to just convince the lecturer that you have understood these things and you have studied this topic. You need to be mentioning these names. So make sure that you are familiar with them. Okay, so now, having mentioned the proteins that are involved now, how does now it happen? Like, because in case you don't know, the molecules that doesn't just reach here and let's say they want to enter here inside the cell. They don't just like reach here. Okay, I want to enter. Let me pass. They just go inside. Boom. No, that's not how it happens. There are some processes that are involved. Okay, there are some processes that. So now these processes that are involved in the transporting of molecules from the outside to the inside or from the inside to the outside, they can be divided into two categories. Okay, there are those that are under what is called passive transport, and active transport. Okay, so you need to know both of them. I don't mean that maybe they might ask you maybe to categorize, but I don't think it's just a rare situation. But about the active transport, they might bring some questions about it. Okay, they've brought actually some questions about it before. Now for the passive, I don't know, but for just some learning purposes, I'll teach everything that you need to know. Maybe they might ask about it. Anyways, so let us proceed. So now let's look at what falls under the passive transport. What are these processes? So under the passive transport, under these, That's where now you have. This is where now. Uh, This is where you have what is called simple diffusion. Simple diffusion, and um, the facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion. These two are very important. They might ask you about them. Okay. So now, for now, let me just talk about these two separately. Then I'll later on now talk about the, the others that falls under active transport, and I'll also explain what these two terminologies mean. Okay, and I'll explain even these processes what they mean, because you need to know that. And one more thing, remember I mentioned to say that molecules enters from the outside to the inside. So now there are some molecules which are said to be the ligands. Okay, so a ligand is a certain kind of molecule. Okay, it's like any other molecule, but there is something different about it, which I'm going to explain. But you need to know that it is another kind of molecule, or a category of molecules that enters the cell membrane. Okay, because I'll be mentioning this one. Actually, even in some questions, they might be asking like how the ligands enter the cell membrane. Just know that they're talking about molecules. Okay, so generally ligands are molecules. Okay, are just molecules. They're just molecules. Okay, now let me proceed. Now, so talk about the passive transport. So I said that the first one is simple diffusion. The simple diffusion. So now, this simple diffusion, it involves gases, oftenly, in fact, like always, it is gases. So simple diffusion is simply where the gas molecules, they diffuse from the outside to the inside, or from the inside to the outside. Then they don't need to go through the channel proteins or any of the carrier proteins. They just they kind of like they just diffuse through the bilayer directly, because gases are very tiny. Their molecules are very tiny that they can easily just pass through air. Okay, so now they pass through the the bilayer of phospholipids from the high concentrated solution, from a high concentrated region to the lower concentrated region. So the concentration should be high. If let's say maybe if they are diffusing from the outside part, the concentration should be very high, and then to the inside it should be very low. If that hasn't been made, then it won't happen. Okay, for simple diffusion. That's why it is called simple. It doesn't really involve anything. Now there are some cases where even if inside it is high and outside it is low, it can still enter, and this is where now we involve the carrier proteins. But for passive transport, we don't really involve this. So now, since the gases just diffuses on their own, they don't use energy. So one thing about passive transport, if you were taught if you're taught to compare, to ask you, passive transport does not involve the use of energy. So these two processes that are under passive transport, they don't require the use of energy. Energy is not used anywhere because they just diffuse on their own. From high concentrated, it will be just spontaneous from the high to the low. Okay, on its own, there is no need for any of these channel protein, the transport protein, to be involved. This is just under simple diffusion. No, so it is just on its own. Okay, an example is oxygen. In case you don't know, there is a high concentration of oxygen in the blood than in the inside part of the cell. So oxygen, if it want to enter, it will just diffuse on its own by osmosis. Boom, it is inside. Same applies to, let's say, maybe carbohydrate. I mean carbon dioxide. If carbon dioxide want to diffuse out, let me say maybe there is a high concentration of carbon dioxide. Actually, I mean there is high concentration of carbon dioxide inside the cell, so it can just easily go out by just passing through the bilayers. Okay, this is about simple diffusion. So simple diffusion, you need to explain that it involves the diffusion or the movement of gases or gas molecules from the high concentrated regions to the lower concentrated regions without the involvement of channel proteins by just passing through the bilayers. Now, the last process that falls under the passive transport is the facilitated diffusion. Facilitated diffusion. Now, you need to know that for this one, some proteins are involved which are called the channel proteins. So this is very common for those that for those molecules that involves that are liquid, okay, that are water-like molecules. For instance, H2O itself for water molecules. So let me just say it involves those molecules that can just easily pass through. Okay, they are like in water form, they are in liquid form. They can just pass through, but in these pipe-like structures or the pipe-like structures which are called the channel proteins. So this one, unlike simple diffusion, it is the kind of diffusion that is aided by transport proteins or the channel proteins. Okay, that's why it is called facilitated. It would have been like simple diffusion, but for the fact that a channel protein intervenes, okay, by intervening, it helps. Or in short, it facilitates. Facilitates the movement from the outside to the inside. That's why it is called facilitated diffusion, because the channel proteins facilitate the entry. Okay, so facilitated diffusion. If they told you to define it, it actually came. I think that was in. Let me not say it came. It comes. They like rain questions about this. They might tell you to define any of these two. So you need to know the differences, okay? This is the kind of diffusion from the high concentrated to the low concentrated region. Now, this one is aided by the channel protein. And another thing, it does not involve the use of energy. So in your definition, make sure you mention that facilitated, it is aided by the transport protein. You need to mention about the transport protein, the channel proteins, and apart from that, even the ability of it not using any energy, any form of energy. Okay, even for simple diffusion, you need to mention that no energy is used. When you're defining anything that falls under the passive transport, these don't forget to talk about the energy. Okay, and for facilitated, don't forget to talk about energy and the intervention or the facilitation of the channel proteins, which allows the molecules to enter. Okay, so since this is like it is pipe-like structured, the water will just easily pass through. It will just pass through quickly. Okay, now there are some molecules which are not in liquid form. Okay, they, for example, maybe the molecules for carbohydrates, for nutrients, let me just say, they might be not very hard, but they might be hard, okay, to just pass through. Maybe they might even be bigger than the same channel proteins, okay? Because these are small, they are porous. So now there are some molecules which can be very big, or they can even be in different shapes. Actually, molecules comes in different shapes, most of the molecules. Okay, now these molecules cannot easily pass through the channel proteins. They can neither pass through the bilayer directly, okay, because they are not liquid-like. Okay, they are quite hard, and they can't just easily pass through. Now that is where now the concept of active transport comes in. Active transport. So now, active transport. Let's talk about it. What is this active transport? Okay, so this one, the active transport, is the one that involves the entry of majority of the molecules, or those molecules that cannot be facilitated by these two processes, okay, or that cannot enter with the help of these two processes. They are entered by the help of active transport. Now, how does this happen? How? Now, look, imagine here you you have a carrier protein, what I am calling a carrier protein, or the porous protein. Okay, these two are carrier proteins. Okay, so now this is now where they come to play. This is now where they intervene. So there are some cases maybe where like there is a molecule that want to enter. It can't pass through the barrier directly. It can't even pass to the porous proteins directly. So these are passed through with the help of the carrier or the porous proteins. Now, how does that happen? So this molecule A that can't pass or that can't enter or go out with the help of these two processes is what is called the ligand. The ligand, because it needs the intervention of the carrier proteins. Okay. So now, how does the carrier protein now allow it to enter? So what happens is that, as you can see, this gap that is between A. Okay, this is where now it will kind of like swallow it inside here. Okay, it will put it inside A and change its shape. So now, for it to put it inside A, it will kind of need like to get a hold of it, right? So that is what is called binding. Binding is when it attaches this one and put it inside. Inside of it, inside of the carrier protein. Okay, so that is what is called binding. You'll be hearing that no, the carrier protein first will bind the ligand, so it will like hold the ligand, the ligand, and then put it inside of it and change its shape. So, but you don't need to say that no, it will swallow it or put it inside. No, that's just for the purpose of you understanding. But you just need to say that the carrier protein binds to the ligand and changes its shape. So it needs to change its shape. If the ligand doesn't take the shape of the carrier protein involved, for instance, let's say the inside shape is circular. If it can't be circular, then it can't be allowed to pass through. That's what it means. Okay? If maybe it is rigid enough to be changed, then it won't pass through. Meaning that for this carrier protein, it cannot be allowed to enter. Okay? It will be helped or be entered by another carrier protein. And actually, the carrier proteins have got different shapes. So each carrier protein will change the ligand to its own shape so that it can allow it now to enter. Okay, so first from outside it will go here inside and change its shape. From changing its shape, now it will be allowed to enter. Okay, enter inside the cell. The same thing applies when, let's say, it wants to exit from the inside of the cell to the outside of the cell. It will bind to it, change its shape, and then boom, allow it to go outside now. That's what happens. That's why they say that the cell membrane is selectively permeable, because it only allows substances of certain molecules to enter. There are some very large substances, they don't enter inside. They don't. Maybe unless they are broken down further, that's when they will be allowed. And you know the process of breaking down food, right? Digestion system. Okay. So if it is very, very large and there is no any other carrier protein that can accommodate it, then it won't enter the cell membrane. It won't pass through. That's why they say that the cell membrane is selectively permeable. It is because of the carrier proteins. They are very stubborn. If let's say maybe if this one here refuses, like, okay, I can't change its shape, or it can't take my shape, it won't allow it to pass. Maybe it will now be tried on a different carrier protein. Or this is not porous, but receptor, not what I wrote. My bad. They are called carrier proteins or the receptor proteins. Receptor proteins. I confused them with the previous one here. Okay, so these are called the carrier proteins or the receptor protein. So you need to explain that first, the carrier protein or the receptor protein binds to the ligand, changes its shape, and then allows it to enter. Now, there are some things that are involved here. One of the things is changing the shape. So changing the shape requires the use of energy. Okay, this that's why it is found under the active transport category. So by active transport, energy is used. Since it is active transport that is being used here, so energy that is used it should be in form of ATP. ATP, which means that it means adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate. So adenosine triphosphate is the energy that is used to allow a ligand, or let me just say, to change the shape of the ligand. Active transport is used, which uses the energy that is in form of ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. So this is very important. Okay, and then another thing is, for this one, for active transport, it doesn't matter whether the concentration inside is very high and outside it is very low. As long as energy is there, it will be allowed to enter. Because as long as the shape is changed, it will be allowed to enter. Okay, very important. So for this one, it can even allow molecules to enter inside, even if concentration is very high from inside, it will still enter. Okay, it doesn't really depend much on the concentration, and unlike these other two, especially simple diffusion. So this is all you need to know about these two. Now let me just do a summary. I now just kind of like summarize it for you. Before I even do that, now there are some terminologies which they might use. The question that I read, that they can also say that explain how the cell membrane receptors transmit messages across the cell membrane. Now look, they're saying that explain how the cell membrane receptors. I've told you the receptor protein, it is the one that we're also calling the chiral protein A, right? Now, so many, if they ask you that question, they just want you to focus on the chiral protein, not on the simple diffusion part. They just want you to explain this part A. Okay, so meaning that the receptor they are talking about, this, it is called a receptor because it's the one that receives the ligand. Okay, receptor is coming from the word receive. If maybe you are struggling to remember the word receptor. Okay, now they want you to explain how the receptor transmit messages across. So by message they mean, if you look at the model of communication, when you're communicating with something, let's say the guy A want to communicate with the guy B. For you to communicate, it means that you want to send a certain message to the person who is A, right? And for you to send a message, there must be a medium of communication that is involved. Okay, the medium, it can be maybe in form of a voice, or maybe sign languages. Now, even that's how it means when they phrase the question in such a way. They mean that communication happens in such a way that a cell can communicate with the outside part. There is communication that happens. You hear that, no, the cell membrane is also important in cell communication. So by communication, they mean that instead of sending the message that is sent, it is the molecule that is being transported inside or outside the cell. Okay, so now for that molecule or message, by message they are saying the molecule, it is the molecules that are transported, or instead of transport, again they are using the word transmit. Look how they want to confuse you. Instead of transport, they can say transmit. Okay, so instead of saying transport, they'll say transmit the messages across. So they just wanted to explain the message that is being transported, that is being transmitted. It is this area, the ligand. Okay, so you just need to know that, okay, so the membrane receptors, they are talking about this receptor protein or the chiral protein. And then by mentioning the transmitting of messages, they are saying that transporting of molecules, in our case, which is the ligand molecule, across the cell membrane, which is acting like a medium of communication. Okay, and this is what it means. So don't get confused. So transport means, another word they can use in replacement of transport, it is transmit. And then in replacement for the carrier protein, they can use the word receptors. receptors, and transmit the messages. And, instead of saying maybe molecules, they can use the word. Okay, so they might choose the word molecule, ligand, or message. Just know that they're talking about the same thing. Whatever is being transported, okay. Instead of saying carrier, they might choose receptor. Very important. I've explained the cell membrane now in all the angles. I don't really expect you to ever get confused in any way. Let's get back to what I promised you that you understand. So I've explained the structure of the cell membrane. I've talked about the phospholipids, the features, the ones that are hydrophobic and hydrolytic. You know that the phosphates hydrolytic, the fatty acids are hydrophobic because they don't interact with water due to their feature of being non-polar or not charged. How they are oriented and why they are oriented like that. I've also explained about how the cell membrane allows the entry the entry and the exit of substances. What even brought us to this concept here, where I explained about simple diffusion, that it is where the molecules of gases easily just diffuse through the bilayer of phospholipids, and facilitated diffusion, it simply just involves the facilitation of the intervention of the porous or channel proteins. Porous or channel proteins, they are one and the same thing. And the ligands, I mentioned to say that it is just the molecule that is entering, but it enters the cell membrane, or it leaves the cell membrane with the help of the carrier protein or the receptor proteins. Okay, and actually this is where the receptor protein, they bind, changes its shape through active transport and uses the energy in form of ATP. The carrier proteins, you know them, and channel proteins, you know them. They are porous proteins. And passive transport, it doesn't involve the use of energy, and that's where these two falls under. And then active transport, it involves the use of energy, and then receptors, they're just the same as carrier proteins. Okay, it's just another name for them. Okay, because they are the one that receives the ligand. Now, I hope that by now everything has made sense. I hope it has made sense, and sure that now you go to your lectures notes and now attempt to solve some of the questions from the past papers, and I'm 100% sure that you'll be able to solve them all. And for more video lessons like this, sure that you contact me on this number. I'll add you to the group on Telegram, where I upload all the video lessons, and I've already uploaded the video lessons on all the topics for biology, and apart from biology, including physics, chemistry, and mathematics. Make sure that subscribe to the group, and then I add you. Okay, so and one more thing, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel for more videos like this on some topics. I'll be clarifying to you some topics which most of the students find to be confusing, and hope that you've enjoyed the video. And if you have any opinions, make sure that you comment there in the comment section. I'll be replying. So okay, so have a very nice day. So this is Joseph here. Okay, so these are the groups where you are going to be added once you subscribe to the official group for A Plus Academy. As you can see, there is a group for MA110 there. In each group, I upload video lessons which are recorded. All these video lessons have been uploaded, and I still upload them. And in every lesson, I make sure that I solve tutorial questions, especially the most asked questions, so that you can learn and watch at your own pace and revise. Even physics video lessons are already there. Okay, and chemistry, everything is in the group, and the lessons are very organized. You'll be easily learning. Okay, so even biology, the lessons are already there. There are a lot of videos. You'll be just watching them at your own pace. And not just that, there's also this group for A Plus Academy solved documents. So this group, you'll also be added once you subscribe. So this group is where I upload all the solved materials. Okay, even the documents that haven't been solved, starting from last year's past papers and tutorial sheets, I've solved them all. Remember, that's where the questions come from, and oftenly they repeat questions from the last academic year. So I've already solved all the documents. Even the tutorials that they'll be releasing, I'll be uploading them in the same group together with the assignments and the lab reports. They'll all be uploaded in this group. So once you just subscribe, you'll be added in all these groups in just a single subscription. So make sure that you subscribe